Hey everyone, this is Matt Waldman with the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, and we are live this afternoon with Alex Brown of Optimum Scouting. Alex is playing hurt today. He's got a little bit of a voice issue, but I told him that if people put up with the way they see me on camera, that he should be okay with his voice. So, how you doing this morning or this afternoon, Alex?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good, Matt.
Okay, well, good deal. We're gonna get right into this, and we're gonna watch Nick Marshall, who is the Auburn quarterback. Gus Malzahn said that he feels like Marshall can be a quarterback in the NFL. We've had other folks who are, draft analysts, a variety of people who you see in the media or have heard about in the media, question that and say that maybe he would be better as a cornerback. Certainly, Georgia thought he might be a good cornerback when he was there before he got dismissed. I think that's how they were looking at him. Um, but Alex and I are going to take a look at the Ole Miss game and kind of give our thoughts about whether he could fit in an NFL system or develop into an NFL quarterback. Have you Alex has watched a lot of Marshall, and that's one of the reasons why I asked him to return for a return engagement to watch Marshall specifically. So, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about what you've heard about Marshall and some of your initial thoughts about him.
Yeah, once he initially transferred to Auburn, I called up Troy Morrell. He was the head coach at Butler, and he had played against him multiple times when he was at Garden City Community College. And obviously, effusive praise about his athleticism, arm talent, ability to work vertically. But at that time, at that level of football, he was turning the ball over a lot. He led the conference in total touchdowns, and he led it in total turnovers, fumbles, and interceptions. And that's something that he's worked through and he's gotten a lot better at. And the offense that Malzahn's running really protects him in terms of, limiting the number of throws that he makes in the game, limiting the number of shot plays, and really giving him a good opportunity to make plays in the passing game. So that's kind of working against him with that offense because it really is limiting the type of reads that you're seeing with him. But on the other side, you see a guy who has natural ability to work vertically down the field. The accuracy in the ball placement is shoddy, and that's why my comparison for him is Joe Webb, a guy who really athletic, big time arm, never could quite put it all together once he got to the NFL level, but he was able to stick on a roster because he can play receiver, he can work on special teams, and I think for me at least at this point, I think he's more of a better fit at receiver because of that natural ability to make people miss, that elusive quality, and I think he would transition really well in terms of a route running guy because you see that body control when he's cutting and making moves in the open field, and he's really balanced and coordinated that way. As a passer, it's inconsistent with the touch aspect of it, and that's probably my biggest concern. So that's kind of where I stand right now, and it really depends on what team is looking to draft him, because you have to look at your roster makeup and say, well, we only have two quarterbacks on the roster. We could definitely pick him up, have him as our third, develop him, see if he beats out our backup. And worst case scenario, we got a return guy and a receiver that we can develop. And when it comes down to those day three picks, those fourth, fifth, sixth round guys, you don't have much tied up into them. So why not get a guy that has a high upside?
And I think that's really a very logical way of looking at this, and you can certainly understand, when you can draft a guy who has gives you a number of contingencies as a second or third day pick, mostly a third day pick. Um, that's a value to a team because quarterback, obviously, even guys who are drafted in the top 10 are a crapshoot when it comes to how
Yeah.
it's worked out for them. So, personally, I think the Joe Webb comparison is a very fair one. I've also seen Seneca Wallace as mentioned, and I've certainly seen a little bit of that. I've even seen I like to look at spectrums of players, of guys who they would aspire to. Maybe not necessarily that they're that good, will ever be that good, but if I were going to put a player at the top of that spectrum, well, maybe not the top, but a player who would be in the starter range of that spectrum. Michael Vick is at the starter
Yep.
range of that spectrum. And I think there's a lot of qualities that you see where Marshall flashes some of Michael Vick's qualities, but I would hazard to say that maybe the upside is even a little bit I don't know. I have a different view of Michael Vick than maybe a lot of people do. I don't know. I don't think that Vick was Vic didn't. I don't think Vic. I think a lot of people realize in hindsight he didn't study hard enough. He didn't work hard enough. But um, and I think the offense was also kind of enabled him to not have to do those types of things earlier in his career and get away with it. And I think that now that the NFL has kind of caught up to those types of players, and yes, and maybe you could say that Vic was special, and maybe he slowed down during his career. But another argument could be watching it
Yeah,
that
I mean, they were running like true sweeps and like naked boots with him, like
yeah,
stuff that people weren't calling at all. Like they were the only team that were calling that those sort of plays. It was literally a three-man team with T.J. Duck and worked on and him.
yeah,
That was just it was a unique situation. Like everything kind of fell into place for those 2 or 3 seasons.
right.
Um,
It's
but
kind of Robert Griffin early in that sense,
yeah, yeah, I like the comparison there because with Marshall, I mean, it's literally like a flick of the wrist when he's throwing that deep ball. It's natural. It just kind of pops out of his hand. The problem that I have with it is if you really slow it up and you look at frame by frame, that ball is wobbling like crazy, like absolutely crazy. Sometimes I feel like he's just throwing it without the laces, and that speaks to how gifted he is arm talent wise. But I mean, his inability to the placement issues kind of come back to that release point.
yeah.
So that's
And
kind of where I stand.
And I think it's a great one. This is a great player to get a chance to watch because he's compelling and you'll see a lot of wow plays as a fan. But to be able to, like you said, break it down frame by frame, examine it with a little bit of a closer eye, will reveal a lot more dimensions to what he can, what he may not be able to do, and what's really kind of up in the air right now, and why he's a more problematic player than if you were just an Auburn fan or just a college football fan and watching him and going, wow, this guy just makes great plays.
And I can actually say I'm an Auburn fan. My dad went to school there. His family's from there. War Eagle all the way, baby.
See, there you go. There you go. So who better? Who better than to break this
Who
down?
better?
So this will be great. So we're going to get this started. Um, and if you're new to the RSP Film Room, then and you've come to it, into this 21st episode, just on a couple things. I like to plug draft breakdown as soon as possible and tell you guys about how great they are. They cut up all these games that you can watch, and they have it all sorted out by position as well as by prospect. They usually have multiple games on all of the players who not only are likely to be drafted, but players who may go undrafted and get signed by teams. So it's a really great resource for people for fans and for oftentimes for the media. And on top of that, just to give you an idea, this is just two guys watching film. We're going to learn from each other. We're gonna debate. We're gonna learn from, just basically talk about the nuts and bolts of the game as if you guys aren't even here. We're going to rewind tape. We're going to put it on slow motion, that kind of stuff. So this will probably take about an hour of your time, depending on how much you watch in one setting. And feedback's always appreciated too. And if there's somebody that you would like to have us watch at the film room, just let me know. Or and if you're someone who is interested in wanting to be on the show, I've been making appointments about 3 to 5 weeks out. It seems like lately, so it's been cool. But if I haven't met, if you're following me on Twitter and you haven't, I haven't given you an invite, it's not because I don't think you're good enough or I don't think you know anything. It's just because I'm just picking folks that I kind of know right away or see right away. And sometimes there's folks that I think specifically for a specific player that I would love to have watch a game with, for instance today, um, but just hit me up, so just hit me up and I would be glad to talk about doing that at some point. So we're going to get this started. You see the screen all right?
See it?
Okay, cool. All right, so let's start in halftime with this, and if it's either too slow or too jumpy, let me know.
Now it's clean.
Good.
See, like the thing that's good about his natural throwing motion is that it's compact. There's not like an elongated, load up point. I mean, he's very compact with his feet, and from separation to delivery right here. I mean, it's a quick drawback and it's out. That's
Yeah,
that's a big positive for him.
yeah. And that's something that I would say, I mean, that's a fair amount of, that's a reasonable amount of polish from a mechanical standpoint for him right
Right.
now. And would you say, it's hard to say because we're not looking at the all-22, but based on his helmet and what he's looking at, would you say that he's holding the secondary a little bit with this particular play too?
I would. Yeah.
Okay. Which seems to indicate too that his feet and his eyes are and the routes are he's pretty
And you
synced
could
up on that
see,
play.
and you can see with Pruitt. Pruitt's playing. I mean, can you rewind that real quick?
Yeah.
Once the throw is made, you can see that safety right on that middle hash, like right down the middle of the field. So that's all you can ask for. Put that football right on the number of the receiver. I mean, that's just a clean drop.
Yep.
It, Another thing too with that throw, like you see the ability to place it over one level of a defender
Yeah.
because that takes a certain amount of touch as well.
And you can see the ball has a little bit of a wobble there,
Yep.
but hits it right on the mark too. Just a wide open crease right there for him. So,
Oh yeah.
what are your thoughts on the read option game in the pros? And let's. I touched on Robert Griffin, but while we've got this here, I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, I had one set of thoughts I've had about Griffin and the read option is that I think it's certainly a viable NFL scheme. It's worked. You've seen that, but I also am someone who's got one foot in the analyst's idea of you got to win from the pocket. You've got to be able to throw from the pocket, and you got to be able to manipulate the pocket in a way to be able to throw downfield. It doesn't mean that this system doesn't work. It just means that you have to have some skill at being able to do both if you do one.
My approach with the read option is the fact that, okay, from a scheme and a tactics standpoint, the read option is an immediate advantage because you gain a number in the run game. Okay, you have to always account for the quarterback. You have to put an extra guy in. It helps out your passing game with the play action because they have to defend it. So from that aspect, it makes a ton of sense. On the other hand, the way the rules are set, the quarterback is so protected from the pocket that why would you have him be anywhere else? Because him as a ball carrier has a chance of ruining your investment you could lose your franchise player in one hit. So that's the one caveat is that your guy's not protected. He is protected from the pocket, and that's what the game is sort of geared towards. I mean, you can get more holding calls in the secondary, illegal contacts. I mean, why would you not want a guy that can take advantage of those, opportunities and penalties? So
That's a
that's sort of my look at it.
and I think that's a very good one, and it's a very you can see kind of that your perspective also has some management and financial implications there, which I think are very, very important to have when you're investing that much money in a player and time. And and it's not like you can have two, you're always going to be able to get, very rarely you're going to be able to have two players who are capable of starting for you and winning for you at that position on your roster at the same time. Um, so it's an issue where I tend to agree with that. I think there are exceptions to the rule, but even those exceptions are play well from the. I mean, to me, Russell Wilson is probably the best blend of those two characteristics right now. I think if asked to play from the pocket, I think that if you put him in a system like Breeze's, in Sean Payton's offense where you execute some rolls to be able to clear out some passing lanes a little bit more, some half rolls, some drops in ways where you can widen those passing lanes. I think that he could function very well without being as much of a scrambler. And I think that Seattle will eventually transition to that if they can get their offensive line healthy and playing better in terms of pass protection. But I
The
look at
thing with
guys.
thing with Wilson too is he is such an over the top delivery, like overemphasized over the top delivery, that you don't have to worry about those batted balls as much. And when he's running, he knows how to protect himself. He gets out of bounds, he slides. I mean, that's the difference between him and a guy like Robert Griffin. Griffin's a straight line athlete, very linear. He's not elusive, and
No.
he was a guy that his mobility was built around speed. And since those surgeries, you've seen that sapped from him a bit, and he's not nearly as dynamic. So that's, again, it goes back to, you've got to be able to protect yourself and understand, where you're protected.
Yeah, and Kaepernick, I mean, I'll talk about Kaepernick in a minute, but Griffin to me was Griffin is a very tough guy, but he has always been a guy that stood in there, like you said, linear, and he would just stand in there to the last minute. He and Vic had that similar quality where they would take some punishment in ways that you're like, they didn't always know when to hold on to the ball and when to get rid of it and when to leave the pocket. But how about a guy like Kaepernick right now? Who started off, people were really, really excited about him after he took over from Alex Smith, and this year, the past couple years, haven't been haven't been quite as good from a win-loss standpoint, maybe from a statistical standpoint. What's your take on his development thus far?
I don't think he processes information well at all. I think he's slow to react to pre-snap looks. He's often late when he's supposed to hit, a hot pattern. He'll see a guy coming off the edge and just assume that he can make the guy miss in the pocket. And he tries to beat coverages with his feet far too often. I mean, in terms of not throwing with anticipation, having to see a route fully developed before he lets the ball go. And he has what I call make-up arm talent, in that he can throw it late and still complete the pass. It's something that has allowed a guy like Eli Manning to be successful in the league, because he's not the quickest to see a play develop, but he has the arm strength to get it there. And that's what Colin Kaepernick tries to do, but he's a step late on almost every single read that you're talking about. And until he learns to anticipate, throw earlier in progressions, he's going to have a difficult time in the league, because he's just so late processing that information.
So I ask these questions to get back around to Nick Marshall here, and it's really to ask this one final question that I want us to think about as we're going through this is, I've always had the feel that these three teams, the Seahawks, Washington, and San Francisco, are examples of teams that made the most of the athletic skills of those three players. But the risk that comes with doing that, with that system, is that you kind of enable those guys not to develop it to the best of their
Mentally.
ability as pocket passers. Do you feel like that's a fair criticism?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
because
so
you're avoiding the the growth pains, so to speak.
yeah, and I think those growth pains have to happen when it comes to certain. I think Wilson was a capable pocket player, but he still needs to develop in some respects. But I think that you've seen it in very clear relief with Washington and San Francisco. And so when we look at a guy like Marshall and continue to watch his film, it's something worth thinking about. Is a team might pick him and decide, if they get a quarterback hurt, and decide that he plays well enough in a basic way that maybe we can put him in and create this system around him in the same way that maybe even the Broncos did with Tebow during that one playoff run. But at the same time realize we don't want to invest in this guy long term, because who are we going to get to replace him if he gets hurt? Who's going to run our system? And then who also is going to want to play in our system if we're not getting, if you listen to a Washington receiver in the media recently saying that Robert Griffin's taking meals off our table,
Yeah.
because no one wants to play with him because we're not going to produce and be able to command money on the open market, which, as a fan, you hate to hear, maybe even as a coach, you hate to hear on some respects, but it's also reality of, making a living and getting a job and wanting to be able to um, be considered a high performer. There's an aspect to that. So, these are some interesting questions that come into play with why teams may or may not decide to make the choice with Marshall if they look at him as, we need him as a runner and we don't know if we can develop him as a passer to the level that we want. But here's an example of some of that deep ball skill here, and how they play him as a, you've got the fake here. You also have a little bit of hiding the ball, and he's patient with it. It's got a really nice patient feel there.
Yeah, that's a big improvement from last year where he would see the play develop as it's like early in the snap, and he would just rush the throw. It was one of the first few plays of the national championship game against Florida State where they do their fake end around, and he, turns his back to the defense, flips around, he's got a wide open receiver and just overshoots him, and that was something that I was worried about entering the year, and he's really improved on that, allowing plays to develop. You can especially see that here, and this is what, a 50-yard throw in the air,
Yeah,
and it's easy for him.
yeah,
I
and
like
this
it
is,
with an open field right here. Go back real quick.
yeah,
I call it an open field because there's no safety over the middle. This is a post route I'd much rather see on a line and away from that cornerback, pulling the receiver towards that open middle of the field. Because right here, it just seems to me like he's just chucking it up in the air for him.
yeah, and that's a good point. And you wonder too if that's a reflection of him going, okay, I need to just be relaxed. Just relax. Just relax. Don't overdo it. Don't get crazy here. Don't overshoot this ball. And then as a result, probably took too much off of it and lofts it up there. Now that's my armchair psychiatry idea of what may be going on. We don't know, but certainly the result is he lofts the ball a little bit too much, and you can imagine, the emphasis of trying to relax. I mean, the whole drop is so much more relaxed. So, but this isn't by far. We're going to see much more impressive throws in terms of distance and accuracy in this
Oh
particular
yeah.
game.
I'm interested to see what Sammy Coates looks like at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, I am too. I am too.
He's more Terrence Williams to me than Torrey Smith, but he's a mixture of those two guys for me in
I think
terms of what he does vertically down the field, and then after the catch, he's more like Torrey Smith in that he's really difficult to get down.
I think that's very, yeah. I think that's fair. I think
But
Torrey
I
was a
but
little
athlete
more
but
polished.
athlete, yeah, and that's the thing. I don't think he's fluid enough as a route runner to be as effective as Torrey Smith is as like a 1A 1B type of guy. And that's why I like him as a Terrence Williams type because he wastes a lot of steps. He's not really um, fluid through those transitions and working back to the quarterback.
No, definitely not. This is an aspect you'll see. I mean, we talked about how much of a runner he is and his change of direction. Just watch him make this first player miss, and look how close he is when this happens. I mean, you're basically looking at short area quickness, defeating an angle like that. Doesn't get a lot of yards with it, but you're going to see a lot of that in this game where he's just able to make guys miss in close spaces, which aids to your point of if it doesn't work out as quarterback, here's why teams may look at him as a wide receiver. But I like here that he exhausts what we don't know what he sees. So maybe there was something he wasn't confident in throwing at that a better quarterback may have made the choice to throw. But you see, at least from this perspective, that he's doing his due diligence to exhaust his options, and it looks like he's even looking across the field, and maybe is even tempted by something across the field, but chooses not to go there. Which,
Yeah.
for a big arm quarterback who is mobile, oftentimes they get suckered into that, and he does not on this play. Now, we don't know again what he saw. It might have been an obvious "I can't throw it" there. And that's a very important part of being able to see all 22 film when it comes to studying a quarterback. And here's a doozy of a.
Yeah. Yep.
This is probably the worst. This is the worst play I think he makes all night, right
No,
here.
no. He makes the same throw later in the game.
Yeah,
But
that's right. That's
Nicholas,
right.
Nicholas Colson just missed the ball.
Yeah. So what do you think's happening here? What do you think's going through his mind if you were to hazard to guess? Not that we're going to be correct on this, but
Third and 7, just get to the sticks. We've got a curl route with Duke Williams. I like my one-on-one matchup. He's not paying attention at all to the body language of the cornerback, who has eyes on him the entire play and shoulders pointed up the field. The defender never turns his back to him, so that's not a throw he can make.
yeah, and he's got inside position.
Eyes in the backfield.
Yeah, just sitting on the route, watching the quarterback the entire time, and then jumps it. This to me,
You either have to go left hash and then work back over late with your eyes to get away with this throw, or you have to just go somewhere else with the football because that's just not there.
yeah, this is what I would call if you were this is a guy, to me, this is like reading sheet music, but having no feel for the musicians around you. To make that type of analogy, it's a wooden type of performance in this situation.
That's a really good point. Don't mind me popping pills. I'm trying to get my my throat under control.
No worries, no worries. We appreciate you doing this though today. It's funny though. I mean, you look at this and having a feel. This is what to me makes football performance as opposed to science. I mean, certainly you're going to benefit from having the scientific aspects of data analysis, which can be really, really helpful and tremendously beneficial to evaluation and to helping teams. But in the end, you need players who, in theory, can execute what you want to on the stage in front of thousands of people with the pressure of the moment and people barking at you and affecting your emotions and
you're never going to have
testing your will.
You're never going to have the perfect play, and you need players that can make you right when you're wrong.
Yes.
Again, on these play action plays, I just get the feeling that he's locking in the throws.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, I mean, you look at who he's targeting and where, it's like, okay.
He's completely bracketed.
Yeah. It's like, why are you throwing this here? I mean, you unless you think confidently that somehow that your receiver is going to beat the second man inside and you're placing it, it's still, that's a difficult throw in the situation, and it's 2nd and 20. 2nd and 20 to me seems like when you're thinking about what you want to do, let's get some yards to have a manageable 3rd down unless this play comes wide open immediately.
The thing that I've seen a lot with Marshall in terms of his decision making is that he's a lot worse on the road. I don't know for what reason, if that's whether or not he's able to have better communication with Gus Malzahn and the staff, but I started doing the numbers on it, and it was pretty obvious. I mean, even this year, he threw, okay, so at home, he threw 9 touchdowns to 1 pick. On the road, he threw 9 to 6. And
Mm,
for his career at Auburn, he threw 19 touchdowns and 4 picks at home, 13 versus 9 on the road. And I mean, you go back to the Kansas State game wasn't a pretty game to start, but that was a game where you finally saw him make good decisions at the end of the game, and they wound up winning because of a few throws that he made late.
yeah.
It's
And
just it's the difficulty with him is that he can look so good at times and so bad at times. It's never like a nice median with him. It's normally one or the other.
and that's why probably when I heard you say Joe Webb, my first thought was like, I saw Joe Webb. I think Nick Marshall's definitely better than Joe Webb. But when you see the good and the bad, and you talk about the extremes, I understand how it comes out to Joe Webb.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
certainly get that. But it's, and this is another example of you enable a quarterback to do this in the NFL, which he can do. Nick Marshall could probably do this better than Robert Griffin, I think, as a
oh
runner
yeah.
in the NFL. But watch the defender coming downhill here, and you tell me, you watch enough NFL games, he's not going to get patty caked like he did here. It's going
Uh,
to be a much bigger hit than that at the end of
yeah.
this play. And
Yeah, TJ Ward takes no prisoners.
yes, exactly. That's a great example of a player right there. That's gonna be a bruised shoulder, bruised ribs, maybe a concussion. If you don't get down and protect yourself. And he's not a big guy.
No,
But the quickness there, again, that's the type of thing that
you can't
you,
teach that.
you can't teach that. That second move, all nicely done, nicely placed stiff arm. He does that a
I
lot.
mean, he just looks so much more instinctive and natural when the ball's in his hands and he's running.
Yeah,
Even more so than a guy like Denard Robinson in terms of instinctiveness as a ball carrier around multiple defenders. And Denard Robinson's been a pretty darn good running back for the Jaguars as a rookie.
yes,
As a
he
second year player? Is it second year?
second year. Yep.
Yeah, as a second year.
And to give Jaguars credit, they have definitely done some good things systematically to get him into space. But to his credit, to Robinson's credit, he has been far more patient for a young running back in terms of conceptual experience, and he gets it. And he's been mature about getting downhill and getting what he can take, what's in front of him, in ways that were surprising. But this is a hell of a this is just ridiculous. This is probably one of the
And
most ridiculous plays I have seen this year. This is like Aaron Rodgers ridiculous in terms of like physical talent. So let me escape and do this again here, because sometimes the thing freezes up. This play was so good YouTube froze up, so we're gonna see if I can get it to. All right, we were at 222. Let me put it here. All right, we don't need to hear you right now, my man. Let's see. All right.
all right, so where's
All
that?
right.
That's 32.
Yeah. So we got the rollback here. Little pump fake to avoid. Just a nice job of getting inside and still just knowing where he wants to throw, knowing it's wide open. And where were you said the 22? Yeah.
No, that's the 32.
32. 32. Releases the ball from the 32 on a line and catches it, what, at the 11 or the 10-yard line?
Like 65-yard throw in there.
65-yard throw.
It's like at the 5-yard line. Look,
Yeah, at the a bullet. This isn't like that lofted throw. I mean, we're talking like a deep out that you would like ooh and ah over in terms of velocity.
if
Going,
you want to, if you want to see him throw it out of the stadium, pull up the Mississippi State game, his first year with Auburn,
yeah,
and He overthrows a wide open 60-yard post by like 15 yards. So he threw about like 70 yards.
Yeah,
I mean, he was just so amped up about the throw.
this is that Hollywood moment where you go, so you want to play quarterback for our high school team, huh? And
Yeah.
he throws the ball out. This is just this is one of the most insane throws I have seen in quite a long time. And that's what gets you, just from a physical standpoint, that's what gets you excited about a guy like Nick Marshall is like you. I can imagine that there's someone who's watching that and going in the back of their
Oh,
mind, if only, if he could, do we take the chance? Because wow. But you see a lot of his read. How many plays have we seen thus far? Maybe two where he's actually gone to a second read. You know,
I think you're being a little bit generous with him.
yeah, it might be that first play. That's about it, maybe. And that might not even be his second read. That was probably his first read, and he was just disguising it well. But I do love that when he faces pressure, one of the things that you do also like about him, and I don't think Joe Webb did this very well, just because I want to try, and I think it's fun to kind of draw a line with that comparison where it's similar and where it's different, is his first reaction isn't to retreat from pressure, whether it's interior or outside pressure. His retreat is still keeping him downhill.
Yeah,
He's not a turn your back on the line of scrimmage guy like Tebow was, like Vic was, sometimes like Kaepernick can be, or the way Joe Webb was. And he's looking downfield, and that's something that's hard to teach.
yeah. Getting downhill when you're outside the pocket is a huge plus because it allows you to stay on top of that throw and get a proper release.
Yeah. It's not a bad throw either in a lot of coverage there. I mean, it's not a throw you'd want to teach necessarily,
Yeah.
but just from an aesthetic admiration standpoint, that's like, wow, that's pretty nice.
That and an improvement too from last year is the fact that he's holding the ball with two hands when he's maneuvering around the pocket. I mean, he's always got in that triangle position that you look for.
So when you watch that and you've talked about two or three things that he's improved upon, what are things that we've seen thus far that you go, I don't know if he's going to be able to improve upon them? Because some of the things you've talked about are more mechanical, but one thing's mechanical, like the two hands. The other thing that has improved, you mentioned, is just kind of the relaxed feel, dropping back in the pocket to deliver a ball downfield and not rushing it. So there's a little bit of a mental thing that he has been able to improve upon, as well as a physical thing. What are some of the things that maybe you've looked at thus far that you're not sure he's going to improve upon at the next level?
He's not sharp at all with his ball placement. Ball placement on any type of throw. It's just sort of like I'm just going to throw it at a spot kind of thing. And he's not real attentive to detail when he's figuring out where to place a football. And that lack of an accuracy is something that I'm not sure you can improve upon because going back to my first year doing this, I fell in love with the physical tools of a guy like Jake Locker. But in terms of ball placement, he never figured it out. That's just something that I feel like you either have innately or it'll take years and years to develop. And even then, you're going to be behind the eight ball.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's funny because not all teams obviously feel that way because they take a Jake Locker that early and go, we
Yep.
can, we can fix him. But it is
Yeah,
scary that when you look at it enough and go, this guy sometimes can't hit the broadside of a barn that's moving wide open, um, and everything mechanically seems to be sound enough.
exactly.
You know,
Exactly. And that's my concern because his mechanics do look good. He has made improvements there. But the ball placement is still, hit or miss.
yeah,
So, I mean, there's only so much you can change with him at this point.
yeah, and it's plays like this that are going to seduce some teams into him. And when I say seduce, it may work out. But it may not either. And this is another one because look, I mean, you got You got the nice little things of, ball fakes here, the way he sets up looking to his down the middle, maybe even to the right hash, it looks like that he might be looking here. Feels the interior pressure, knows how to move away from it. I mean, when I say turns his back, this is a nice spin. This is what you want to see. He's not retreating back that way. Spins out, quick enough to clear the guy, immediately
Back
but
downhill, back
and he's
downhill.
yeah, downhill and moving to his left on the move. Deep ball down there. That's, I mean, this is a wide open area. I mean, this is
They'll
extreme.
show. I think on this one they'll have the all 22 where they show safety just falls down.
Yeah. No, but if you saw that, if you've seen that, that's great to know, because they might have cut that out on Draft Breakdown if it was there. But this is a guy that, yeah, if you pin him into a corner, he can paint his, they paint him into a corner. He can get his way out of that corner without probably getting a lot of paint on his feet. But it's not but it's inconsistent because a lot of what you said, the mental approach to the game, ball placement. Plays you won't likely see in the NFL. He's quick. It might happen once or twice, but about, let's say, I don't know, week 2 of season 2, we're going to see him sitting on the bench or in the locker room after something like that. See, even this, when you talk about placement, even a small play like this, I'm nitpicking here because it's thrown over the shoulder, but it's kind of like Vic. Vic didn't have a great placement feel either because he bullets a lot of balls as opposed to even putting a little bit of touch under it or knowing when to do one or the other. And this isn't bad, but when you see kind of a lower trajectory even on throws like that sometimes.
You're saying you're getting at the point where you want that ball with little arc leading towards the sideline, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just a little bit.
It's little things. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even the guy people are picking on like Johnny Manziel and who's certainly earned some of what's gone on this year in terms of his behavior from what it sounds like. When you watch his college tape, you see evidence of some of that touch there on throws like this. Even under duress, you see some of that. Um, his issues are completely different. But yeah, this is like a punt returner. I mean, this guy,
Yeah.
you could put him back here on punt returns right now, and he would do a good job for you.
That's probably where I like him the most.
See, there
I
you
mean,
have it.
seriously, I'm not saying that as a criticism. I think he would be dangerous back there.
Yeah, and that's the. And can you talk a little bit about I've always, the more I watch returners, I kind of feel like that there is a difference between a good punt returner and a good kick returner. You can be both, but you could be stronger in one than the other. And to me, it's been with a punt returner, there's a little bit more room for improvisation.
Yeah.
Um, you need a little bit more of that quick twitch, lateral agility and creativity.
You
Whereas with
you
a
want
kick,
that natural elusiveness. Yeah.
yeah. Whereas with a kick returner, you want a guy who can press and cut a little bit more, but still do it in a downhill, economical way and set up his blocking schemes in ways where there's a little bit more time to do that often.
Yeah, with returners, I like guys that are find that lane and get through it. I mean, you need that burst and that long speed that just makes you go wow, and the ability to crease and attack open alleys, in ways that it they don't present themselves for punt returners. I mean, you're on the front line. You've got to be a courageous dude, willing to take a hit, and you've
Yeah.
got to know that as soon as you catch this ball, there could be a guy 2 feet away from you that you have to make miss.
Now, this is the type of run I would like to see him only make in the NFL. Get out of bounds. or
Yeah.
slide because they're
There you go again on the low trajectory, back hip.
yeah, yeah. Now let's talk about mechanics because I've had this conversation with Sigmund Bloom, and I kind of like I'm kind of in the middle of this. It's there are people who I feel like nitpick mechanics to a point where they're like, you're nitpicking somebody who's actually making plays and doing a good job, but you're criticizing their feet or you're criticizing their arm or you're criticizing their placement in certain respects. Where's the balance to you where you say there's an overemphasis of mechanics and where you say mechanics are important? Is that a decent question to ask, or should I rephrase that a little bit better?
No, no, no. It's a decent question. I was gonna say it was a decent question, but it's a good question. Um, you know, I spent a lot of time when I first started evaluating, studying the quarterback mechanics and really nitpicking on that. But really, it comes down to, is he accurate with what he's doing? Is it an efficient motion? Can he clean things up to where it's more of a fluid, active motion? And the main thing is getting the feet underneath you, finishing, high. You don't want to talk about getting high with your separation because then the only place you can go is down. You want to be driving upward and through the throw. And something interesting that I read it's called The Making of the Modern Quarterback by Bruce Feldman. I definitely recommend that for anybody who studies this game and wants to know more about the quarterback position. Um, he interviewed and talked with Tom House, a pitching guru,
Yeah,
quarterback guru, guy that trains what he calls rotational athletes. So he'll work with, tennis players, football players, baseball players, whatever. But he was talking about how there is no such thing as an overstriding. You can't overstride as a passer. It's all different based on the body type and the makeup of the athlete. Because you watch a guy like Tom Brady, and he has a big stride to his game because he's a leg-based thrower. You look at Peyton Manning, and he's a rotational guy where it's all about the hip torque. And so he has a tiny, tiny stride step. So really, it comes down to figuring out what's comfortable for you and what works for you individually, and then being able to repeat that on a consistent basis. So, the thing is, when you're talking about, well, if we change this to his mechanics and we, tweak this, then maybe he can be an accurate guy. That's all well and good in theory, but the 10,000 hour of mastery rule is still in play. You have to rep it and rep it and rep it and rep it. And you look at a guy like Blake Bortles this year who wasn't ready and he was still trying to work through mechanical flaws. They rushed him into action, and you saw him revert back to some old, old mechanics. I mean, talking before his junior year at
yeah,
was his freshman sophomore. Before, I mean, the early years at UCF where he was dipping the ball like Tebow and overstepping and being completely out of balance on throws that where he had space to step in and throw, and that's the risk you run when you draft the young kid that needs time to develop and you're forced to rush him into action. So that's sort of my opinion on it. Where there's only so much you can do at the NFL level because they need those players to play right away. So unless you're in a position where you have a Tom Brady, you can draft a guy like Garoppolo and sit him for a full year, a full 2 years. It's not worth it to spend a second or a third round pick on a guy that's a quote unquote developmental pick. So I don't know if that really completely answered your question. I tend
no,
to
I
talk
think
in
I think
circles.
it's a great answer, and I have 3 points I'd love to talk about in response to that. I think one is that I love that you bring up the 10,000 hours and the practice aspect. There's a lot of that inner game of tennis. If you've ever read that book or heard of that book, it's a book that Pete Carroll and a sports psychologist who works with the Seahawks has talked about. Danny Kelly brought it up, I believe, in his field goals. Um, blog. And the inner game of tennis is really the whole principles are there's a tennis coach who basically used to try and teach people perfect technique. And I'm giving you the short version of this. The simplistic version is he tried to teach people technique and drilled them relentlessly on perfect technique. And then he finally realized one day that everyone's body mechanics are different and the way they process the information is different. And it's not so much about it's not so much about trying to correct every little thing, because if they think about each little technique as they're doing it, then they're not in the flow of their body mechanics and the flow of the game. They're not integrating everything into the situation the way it needs to be integrated. So instead, he started teaching people by just saying, here, watch me hit the ball. Just watch me do it, and then you try to do it. And the trust of that was this. He trusted the fact that the human brain is going to process what it can do from a biomechanical standpoint to fit its body. And so it will approximate what that person's doing, um, and conform it to what are the limitations of that person's body, so that way they're not focused so much on small little things like get your elbow set a little further in, or make sure that your hips located in this way, and as a result, the more hours you put in just following that, but you getting the feel for it with your body and doing it right, you're not so focused on the minutia. So there's that, and I think that that's something that I know Pete Carroll has been a big advocate of that book and big advocate of those teaching techniques. I'm glad you mentioned Tom House, which is kind of funny because when I think of Tom House, I think of my baseball card collection back in the 1970s, where I used to want to trade away his card that was him traded to the Texas Rangers, and seeing this big red-headed afro guy, with his hat on, and so when I first heard that, back in I think it was the 90s that he started doing this, or maybe the late 80s, I always found that peculiar, but he's become a household name. And then third, you've talked about, really when it comes to having balance with how these players, the different ways that players perform and what they do. And I think that that's so important, just being able to look at what style works for them, and really, understanding the differences in what those styles are, when it comes to watching them, and if it works for them, as long as it works for them, then, and when I say works, it isn't statistically works as much as it is it placed where it needs to be placed? Does he have control over where the ball needs to be for the receiver to make the best decision? Is he able to make decisions at a level where he has some flexibility to his game and his technique doesn't limit him so much that he only has one choice?
That's such a great call for beating a cover three, in the red zone.
Yeah.
Post wheel. You can't cover that.
And holds the safety a little bit.
Pulls that cornerback across with that post route.
Yeah.
He's pissed off because he knows it is his fault. He's like, what am I supposed to do?
He's just jumping around. Yeah.
Yeah.
One more time and we'll get on to the rest of this. And here's an example of that again. And this is a nice conceptual play in terms of looking downfield, feeling the pressure, and immediately knowing where his man is to throw. That's great. But the trajectory, I think he should have caught it. But again, he puts the ball on you fast on these plays where a little bit more loft gives the receiver time to adjust, especially a back.
Yeah, and what I would like to see, the all-22 and see what he was looking at downfield, because it seems to me like he went from one to check down.
Yes. And that is a great point.
And I can't prove or disprove it or know for sure, but that's just my instinctive feel for what happened on the play,
Yeah. And when you look at the coverage now, you look in here and you're probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You got 7. Do we have 8 going into coverage? Let's see. We have 8 going into coverage. So you've got.
It looks like a 4. Looks like a cover 4 shell.
Yeah. So what would you say in theory would he be looking at in a cover 4 shell with a 2-by-2 receiver set up like this? What might be a route? What are some of the routes that he might be looking at here?
Well, I always know that when Baylor plays Kansas State, they run a heavy cover four package. They like to go with a dig and a post on the same side to where they try to pull. So the inside receiver's running a dig, and he tries to pull that over the top safety down towards the middle of the field, and then run that deep post to the inside, behind that safety. So you have a vertical pull two ways with the post and the dig on one of those hash safeties. So that's normally one of the go-to routes for me. But I feel like when you're talking about reads, it all depends on the combo and the route progression that you're looking at on a specific play, because it's going to change from play to play.
Right, right, absolutely. Okay. So here's another question for you about, you mentioned Garoppolo, and I was pretty critical of Garoppolo in one aspect of his game, and it's going to be really interesting for me to see whether or not he improves in this area, because I've actually installed some knockout factors on my in my evaluation, basically saying pass fail. If you don't show that you can do this, I'm failing the evaluation. It doesn't mean that you won't make it in the NFL, but it means to me that you may have a higher score or higher rating to me in your evaluation than another player, but if that other player passed that section, I'm probably going to give more weight to that player's development potential than to the guy who has the higher score. And so I look at someone like Garoppolo, and I felt like that his ability to handle interior pressure and rush his process, or to drop to the ground, or to just kind of go haywire with his decision making, and really was notable when under pressure. So my question to you is, when you look at quarterbacks and how they deal with pressure, how important is that to you? What you know, what are your thoughts on whether they can develop that and get better at it?
Yeah, yeah, that's a huge aspect of the game, because you're always going to be playing in the eye of the storm at the NFL level, because everybody has multiple pass rushes that can get after you. But with Garoppolo, I see a lot of similarities between him and Petty in terms of their system and what they were taught to do. Those reads are very simplistic. You widen the field. You're looking at, a one or two route combination, and you're getting the ball as fast as you can. And neither of those two guys are trained or prepared, given the tools they need to succeed when pressured, because neither Garoppolo or Petty have a developed sense of drop back footwork and how to reset within the pocket. Your back foot should be the one that's moving first. And with those two guys, they move both of their feet. They panic. And that's a concern, but it also goes back to the offense they're in. So my question moving forward for, obviously, Garoppolo, it's going to be a matter of, can he develop that footwork? How long does it take him to develop that footwork and develop a feel for that? Because the big positive for me with quarterbacks that are coming from pro-style systems isn't the fact that they're playing under center or running really old school passing, concepts. I think that's a archaic way of looking at it. I think the biggest plus is that they know the timing, between a three-step drop and the slant, a timing between a five-step with a hitch, what routes they need to throw, the nuances between a five-step on different type of pass patterns that they're throwing, like if they're throwing a bang eight, or if they're throwing a comeback, or if they're throwing a double move. You have to have a feel and develop that feel in practice, making those drops and seeing how your receiver's getting down the field. Because in the spread system, your catch, rocker, step, wait till the guy gets into position and he's wide open. You release the football. I mean, it's bigger windows based on alignment, and it makes things easier, and you don't have to, necessarily develop that refined sense of footwork and timing. So that's the concern I have for a guy like Garoppolo and a guy like Bryce Petty.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And that kind of bleeds into the other point of, you're talking about Blake Bortles and his development, and how that teams rush a player into a situation. To me, it's like Garoppolo looked good in the preseason, but you also have to understand that when the regular season comes and the intensity of play goes up a notch, um, the question mark will be, will he have exhibited improvement at that quick of a rate if he were to get into a game? Now he'll have a full year under his belt now, but how much of that, how much experience is he really going to have being a second string quarterback or a third string quarterback? You know,
And the thing is, the hardest part about developing those high rep skills, things that you need to repeat over and over again, that make second nature for your muscles. Um, you never know what's going to happen until you step out on the field and play a live, game action, because there's a difference between practice reps and game reps. And the concern, so like Tom House, you worked with Tim Tebow as well, and he worked through him and worked him, got rid of the loop, got rid of some super inefficient parts of his motion, and he came away and said, you know what, I'll never know if he's really got it until he steps back on the field and takes a game rep. And what happened was he went back to what his body is comfortable with, whatever he's used to. So that's the concern that you have when you have a player coming from that sort of a spread, high tempo offense that doesn't develop that footwork, because he spends so much time catch, rock, or step, throw, and that's what he's used to. That's what he's comfortable doing. That's what he's going to revert to when the going gets tough.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a good story with House, and it's funny because then you have in contrast a guy who obviously didn't come from those from that spread system, but a guy who had I would say equally as big of a loop in his throwing motion at times, or brought the ball down to his thigh or his knee level sometimes, even at the age of, I don't know, 40 years old in an NFC Championship game. You could see examples of that in his game, and that was Brett Favre. So I think that brings the point back to mechanics being, if there are, again, Brett Favre was an exception to the rule in many respects, but you look at that and you understand that that's where you have to look at it, though, because I think that when you look at players, one of the difficulties of scouting is that you have to be able to identify, or it benefits you to identify where a player might be the exception to the rule, and that's difficult. But those exceptions to the rule change the game. They change the playing field to a level that makes a team a Super Bowl contender, or gives you an MVP caliber athlete. And Favre is an example of a guy who, at age 40 is bringing the ball down to his knee and making passes that you would say, well, that's Tebow's problem. Well, that was one of Tebow's problems. It wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back necessarily.
Yep. That's a great point. Great point.
All right, so let's watch the rest of Marshall here. And see, this I think is actually pretty good feel. Even though you would say, as a no-no rule, you would say you don't want to retreat from pressure, and he's got this pressure in his face, but one step back, throws off his back foot. You would say this is a dangerous play. This is like the Eli Manning, Jay Cutler, Matt Stafford type of thing that people go, well, look, he can do this, and you'd say, yeah, he's going to hit that some of the time.
Yep. With plays like that, you got to take the good with the bad. I mean, the bad with the good.
Yeah. Or Brett Favre. Brett Favre would be another one. All those guys are in the Brett Favre aspirational mode, actually, when you think about it in that sense.
That'd be something to do a film room on Brett Favre's tape.
Oh, I would, yeah.
Find some Southern Miss.
Yes. I got to say, I always like to tell this story, but I think I was 21 or 22 when Brett Favre was coming out of Southern Miss, and I remember that because I think he and I are the same age. I think we're the same age. One of my closest friends who's coaches like Pee Wee and middle school football, just really into football. His name's Trey, and Trey went to Alabama, and Trey's a big Alabama fan, but he I remember we were watching a game and he was just going on and on about Brett Favre. I had never seen Brett Favre play, and he was just, it was a preseason game in Atlanta, and Favre got in the preseason. He was just telling me about how unbelievable Brett Favre was and how good of a player he'd be if only Jerry Glanville didn't believe that the only way that he would play is that there was a plane crash to the team charter. Uh, and I just remember, I've never forgot that. It was just interesting because he would tell, I just remember him telling me all the stories about Favre and always, just how great of a player he really could be at one point.
Yeah. Go back to that last play.
Yeah.
Not this run, but the pass before that. This is the play we're talking about. Exact same. Is a third
Yes.
down, curl route, locks into the throw.
Should have been jumped. Yeah.
And that's the finer point of position where you have to be able to read the body language of the secondary. I mean, not just corners, but even safeties. If they're creeping into the box, if they're creeping downhill, or if they're retreating,
Yeah.
because that's how you get your pre-snap coverage looks.
That's right. And here we are again, inside shade by not even a half step. We're talking a full step of inside shade here at the number. He's outside the numbers. He's on the number. The cornerback's on the numbers. Looking into the backfield. You need to be able to see that right here. You need to be able to see that he's sitting on this route.
I can't believe he missed the interception.
Yeah. Yeah. This should be this should be the game sealer right here. The game winner.
Yeah.
And it turns into a good result.
Yeah, that's the when I see plays like that happen, it makes me think of the basketball analogy where you can have a good shot selection and a bad shot result. You can also have a bad shot selection and a good shot result. And so if you're a results based person, then you can get yourself into trouble. It's about the process and what they're doing to get to their end result that you really need to look at.
Amen. Amen. And here's another one. Now we have a pass where he actually tries to put some touch on the ball, but undershoots it. So yeah, it's all a little wonky when it comes to those short area plays. But yeah, so that's Nick Marshall that we've got in terms of what we've seen thus far. Um, I think that you did a really great job, Alex, of just talking about where he needs to improve and where he may not ever improve, and why that's the case. It just as a one last bit of conversation, and if you want to link this to Marshall or just talk about quarterbacks in general, either way is fine. But I would love for you to discuss a little bit more in detail why you think the NFL feels so urgent about getting quarterbacks on the field right away. Because it's one of those things that I'm kind of radical with my thoughts about certain things, and I know that some of them are not based in reality of the situation, but I like to talk about the fact that I like to see them sit players. Like, to me, the Blake Bortles thing, I'm like, if they said they were going to sit him for the year, then do it. Let Chad Henne play. If he gets the crap beat out of him, that's okay, because you didn't draft, you didn't have him.
That's what you signed him for. That's what you signed him for. Yeah, I think it goes back to there's so much more power of the fans, voice of the fans, and teams cave. They absolutely cave when people start calling for people's names. And the best example of that was what happened in Denver. And it obviously worked out for them that year, and they made the playoffs. But that was just a fiasco. I mean, it's the whole, the inmates are running the asylum type of thing. So I think the issue with teams not sitting and developing their players as much is just a misplaced sense of urgency to see their return on investment, and that's a short-sighted look at it, and it's a problem.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating problem because I mean I, I've written an article about this, and it was more of just more of a fun creative piece saying if I owned a team, this is what I would do, and it's one of those, and in this like completely no way in hell it's ever going to happen scenario of that I win the Powerball times a million, and I can somehow use my money to like peddle my way into the NFL as the Beverly Hillbillies version of the NFL ownership society. I'd be Jed Clampett in this case, is I or Jethro probably, but but I would have probably said I want to study the Green Bay Packers ownership plan and how can I put into place having a 20-year plan. Basically, I'm going to give this team to the city. They're going to own the city. The city's going to own this team in 20 years, but it's under these conditions that basically I'm going to tell the city, we're going to suck for 5 years. We're going to suck so bad for 5 years that you're going to want to hang me in effigy. I might have to live in another city for the first 5 years just so that I don't have to deal with you guys. But we're going to build this team slowly, and we are not going to cave to fan and media pressure about things. And I'll get up there, have my coach get up there. I'm going to have continuity with coaching staffs, with scouting, and we're going to do this long term, and we're going to build. And if we have people in the seats who are, coming up with the most inventive, creative, and nasty ways to say how bad we suck, that's fine, because in 10 years, when I hand this team over, y'all are going to be kissing my behind. That's kind of the joke that I would say with this and how we do it. But I think there's something to be said about continuity with coaching staff, with owners getting the heck out of the way, and not pressuring to say my neighbors are complaining to me that this isn't happening, or my financial analysts are worried about this quarter's numbers and thinking quarter to quarter and year to year as opposed to long term, and having some vision about, having some vision and understanding about team building. And I think quarterback being the figurehead position of your team and being the most complex position to have to learn in many respects, rushing a player onto the field when we've seen Aaron Rodgers not get rushed onto a field. We've seen Steve McNair as an example of a great athlete who didn't get rushed onto the field, and this was a generation before in terms of quarterbacking. But there are some players that we don't want. There are some players where it makes sense to wait a year or two. I mean, to me, Garoppolo is a good example of a guy who needs to wait, or Bortles needed to wait. Someone like Bridgewater, to me, it would have been nice if they could have him wait a year, but I think that his skill in the pocket, his ability to handle pressure, and his poise were things that were good reasons why, as long as he didn't get the crap knocked out of him too much, and that's a big issue, is handling pressure and being hit, because if you get hit too much, that can make you go south in terms of your concepts and your feel for the game, and it can it can kind of beat the game out of you.
Yeah.
So there you have it. We've exhausted Nick Marshall and quarterback conversation. So thank you, Alex Brown, for joining us, and thanks again, everyone, for watching. And you guys have a good New Year. Happy New Year.